Hello everyone and welcome back to another read aloud video for Inkheart by Cornelia Funke. Today I'm going to be reading two short chapters, me reading chapter 7 and chapter 8. They're both only a couple pages, so I figured I would do them both together. Chapter 7. When the Night Hides. 1,000 enemies outside the house are better than one within. Arab proverb. Chapter 7, When the Night Hides. What the Night Hides. Dustfinger was hiding behind a chestnut tree when Maggie ran past him. He saw her stop at the gate and look down the road. He heard her calling her father's name in a desperate voice. Her cries, as faint as the chirping of a cricket in the vast black night, were lost in the darkness. And when she gave up, it was suddenly very quiet. And Dustfinger saw Maggie's slim figure standing there as if she would never move again. All her strength seemed to have forsaken her, as if the next gust of wind might blow her away. She stood there so long that Dustfinger eventually closed his eyes so as not to have to look at her. But then he heard her weeping, and his face turned hot with shame. He stood there without a sound, his back to the tree trunk, waiting for Maggie to go back to the house. But still, she didn't move. At last, when his legs were quite numb, she turned like a marionette with some of its strings cut and went back toward the house. She was no longer crying as she passed Dustfinger, but she was wiping the tears from her eyes, and for a terrible moment he felt an urge to go to her, comfort her, and explain why he had told Capricorn everything. But Maggie had already passed him, and had quickened her pace as if her strength were returning. Faster and faster she walked, until she had disappeared among the black trees. Only then did Dustfinger come out from behind the tree, put his backpack on his back, pick up the 2 bags containing all his worldly goods, and stride off to the gate, which was still open. The night swallowed him up like a thieving fox. Chapter 8. Alone. "My darling," she said at last, "are you sure you don't mind being a mouse for the rest of your life?" "I don't mind at all," I said. "It doesn't matter who you are or what you look like, so long as somebody loves you." Excerpt from The Witches by Roald Dahl. Chapter 8. Alone. Eleanor was standing in the brightly lit doorway of the house when Maggie came back. She had put a coat over her nightdress. The night was warm, but a cold wind was blowing from the lake. How desperate the child looked, and lost. Eleanor remembered the feeling. There was nothing worse. "They've taken him away." Maggie's voice almost choked in her helpless rage. She glared angrily at Eleanor. "Why did you hold me back? We could have helped him." Her fists were clenched, as if she wanted to hit out blindly. Eleanor remembered that feeling, too. Sometimes you wanted to lash out at the whole world, but it did no good, none at all. The grief remained. "Don't talk such nonsense," she said bluntly. "How could we have helped him? They'd just have taken you too, and how would your father have liked that? Would it have done him any good? No. So don't stand around here any longer. Come indoors." But Maggie didn't move. "They're taking him to Capricorn," she whispered so softly that Eleanor could hardly make out what she was saying. "Taking him where?" Maggie just shook her head and wiped her sleeve over her tear-stained face. "The police will be here any minute," said Eleanor. "I called them on your father's cell phone. I never wanted one of those, but now I think I'd better get one after all. They simply cut my phone line." Maggie still hadn't moved. She was trembling. "They'll be well away by now anyway," she said. "Good heavens! I'm sure no harm will come to him." Eleanor wrapped her coat more closely around her. The wind was getting up. There would be rain soon, she felt sure. "How do you know?" Maggie's voice was trembling with anger. Heavens, thought Eleanor. If looks could kill, I'd be pushing up daisies. "Because he went with them of his own free will," she said crossly. "You heard him too, didn't you?" Maggie bowed her head. Of course she'd heard him. "Yes," she whispered. "He was more worried about the book than me." Eleanor had no answer to that. Her own father had been firmly convinced the books deserved more attention than children, and when he suddenly died, she and her 2 sisters had barely noticed his absence. It was as if he was just sitting in the library as usual, dusting his books. But Maggie's father wasn't like that. "Nonsense! Of course he was worried about you," Eleanor said. "I don't know any father who's more besotted with his daughter than yours. You wait and see. He'll be back soon. Now do come in." She reached out her hand to Maggie. "I'll make you some hot milk with honey. Isn't that what children get when they're really miserable?" But Maggie ignored the hand. She turned suddenly and ran away as if something had suddenly occurred to her. Here, wait a minute! Muttering crossly, Eleanor slipped her feet into her gardening shoes and stumbled after her. The silly girl was running around behind the house to the place where the fire eater had given his performance. But of course, there was no one on the lawn now, just the burnt-out torches still stuck in the ground. Well, well, so Mr. Matchstick Swallower seems to be gone too, said Eleanor. At least he's not in the house. Perhaps he followed them. The girl went up to one of the burnt-out torches and touched its charred head. That's it. He saw what happened and followed them. She looked hopefully at Eleanor. Of course, that's what must have happened. Eleanor really did try hard not to sound sarcastic. How do you think he followed them? She added silently in her mind. On foot? But instead of saying so out loud, she put a hand on Maggie's shoulder. Heavens above, the girl was still shaking. Come on, she said. The police will be here soon, and there's nothing we can do just now. Your father will surely turn up again in a few days' time, and perhaps your fire-breathing friend will be with him. You'll just have to put up with me in the meantime. Maggie merely nodded and unresistingly let Eleanor lead her back to the house. On one condition, though, said Eleanor as they reached the front door. Maggie looked at her suspiciously. While we're here on our own, do you think you could stop looking at me as if you wanted to poison me all the time? Could that be arranged? A small, sad little smile stole over Maggie's face. I should think so, she said. The two policemen whose car drew up on the gravel forecourt a little later asked a lot of questions, to which neither Eleanor nor Maggie had many answers. No, they had never seen the men before. No, they hadn't stolen money nor anything of value, just a book. The two men exchanged amused glances when Eleanor said that. She immediately gave them an angry lecture on the value of rare books, but that only made things worse. When Maggie finally said they'd be sure to find her father if they tracked down a bad man named Capricorn, they looked at each other as if she had seriously claimed that Mo had been carried off by the big bad wolf. Then they drove away again, and Eleanor took Maggie to her room. The silly child had tears in her eyes once more, and Eleanor hadn't the faintest idea of how you went about comforting a girl of 12, so she just told her, Your mother always slept in this room, which is probably the worst thing she could have said. She quickly added, Read a story if you can't get to sleep. She cleared her throat twice, and then went back through the dark, empty house to her own room. Why did it suddenly strike her so big and so empty? In all the years she had lived alone here, it had never troubled her to know that only her books awaited her behind all the doors. It was a long time since she and her sisters had played hide-and-seek in the many rooms. How quietly they always had to slip past the library door. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters of the windows. Heavens, I won't be able to sleep a wink, thought Eleanor. And then she thought of the book waiting beside her bed, and with a mixture of anticipation and a very guilty conscience, she disappeared into her bedroom.